If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe to my channel for more of my content. Also be sure to press the bell button down below, that way when a new video comes out, you'll be notified. If you were to name two rival countries that are near each other that threaten world peace, what would come to mind? Most of you would probably say North and South Korea, China and Japan, Saudi Arabia and Iran, or the United States and Russia. And while there is a lot of tensions between those said countries, none can come close to the rivalry that is between India and Pakistan. While most media outlets don't pay attention to these two countries on the South Asian subcontinent, these two are possibly the most dangerous to world peace. Now you may be asking, how so? I mean, sure they don't get along, but how can they be dangerous? Simple, these two have a nuclear arsenal, and let's just say that these two hate each other so much that one simple thing can set them off.
Dear Pakistan, up yours. Love, India. Let's see what happens.
They did not need much.
For over 70 years, these two nations have been fighting each other since their independence. Now you may be asking, why are these two fighting? Well, for one, it's land, specifically in this northern region called Kashmir, which we'll get more into later, which leads to another factor, religion. As you can see, India is majority Hindu, while Pakistan is majority Muslim. Again, you ask, well, what's the difference? Trust me, I have met people who thought they were the same. Also, keep in mind, I'm going to give a very simplified explanation to both religions, mainly due to time. Go watch these videos if you want a better understanding of them. Hinduism is the world's oldest religion, going back as far as 4,000 years ago. It is a polytheistic religion with its own pantheon similar to that of the Greco-Romans or the ancient Egyptians. There is also the concept of karma and reincarnation, which also plays a key factor in it. And it even inspired other South Asian religions such as Buddhism and Jainism. Islam, on the other hand, is a monotheistic religion founded in the 600s by the Prophet Muhammad, which is now part of modern-day Saudi Arabia. It shares many similarities to the other Abrahamic faiths such as Judaism and Christianity, where they believe in one God who they call Allah. Again, very simplified, I can't do these explanations justice. Now, if you think the fight between Jews and Muslims are bad, try looking at Hindus and Muslims. While there have been attempts for the two religions to make peace with one another with even the rare occasions of interfaith marriages, the hatred between these two religions has been a huge stain on the history of South Asia, with Hindus killing Muslims for eating beef because cows are sacred in Hinduism, and Muslims killing Hindus as they're seen as worshipping false idols, which leads me to today's topic. I'll be talking about the major conflicts fought between India and Pakistan and what the future holds for these two countries. Also, I'm well aware that there are Muslims in the Indian military and Hindus who are in the Pakistani armed forces, though the latter wasn't allowed to join until the year 2000, but at the same time, the fight between these two countries is mostly due to religious differences. That being said, let's start with the origin of this feud. During the 12th century, the Muslims would invade India and were rather brutal with their conquest, such as forcing those to convert, destruction of non-Muslim religious temples and idols, and killing anyone who did not abide by their rules. In fact, this was the main reason why Buddhism almost went extinct in India. To say that it was a bloodbath would be an understatement, thus starting a wedge between Muslims and Hindus. However, future Muslim leaders such as Razia Sultana and Akbar the Great would make efforts to heal these wounds and reunite not just Muslims and Hindus, but Sikhs, Buddhists, and even Christians. In fact, Muslims and Hindus would put aside their differences in order to fight against the British invasion of India. However, that was all thrown away when the British came in and took over India in 1857. The British were devious in how they colonized India. They would conduct a divide and conquer strategy, pitting certain groups against each other while they took the resources. Of course, these groups would include Hindus and Muslims. Throughout the 20th century, there would be a growing independence movement. Some would use violence to get what they want, such as the case with Netaji Bose, while others would use a more peaceful process, such as the case with Mahatma Gandhi. As you can imagine, the British weren't willing to let this go and did a major crackdown on any dissent. After World War II, India's want for independence began to grow stronger, and because of the damages and loss of money after the Second World War, Britain couldn't hold on to India anymore. It pretty much went something like this.
It's not worth it! It's just not worth it! Goodbye, everyone. I'll remember you all in therapy.
However, there was an issue. The Muslims wanted to have their own state. Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the leader of India's Muslim League, feared that an independent India would lead to a Hindu majority oppressing the Muslim minority. This fear was due to the amount of anti-Muslim riots that were occurring at the time. So the British divided India into two nations, technically three, but we'll get to that one later. India will be for Hindus and West and East Pakistan for Muslims, with Pakistan being led by the aforementioned Muhammad Ali Jinnah and India led by Jawaharlal Nehru. Okay, so not perfect, but at least everyone was happy, right? It was a complete disaster. The partition of India was supposed to keep a civil war from occurring, but it did just the opposite. Because the lines were divided between Hindus and Muslims, many had to flee their homes in order to go to a place that had their people. When the two sides met, violence ensued. Both sides committed atrocities. Killings, rapings, kidnappings, and arson was commonplace. Not to mention those that died from starvation, heat stroke, and sickness. It was total chaos, with the most affected were the regions of Punjab and Bengal. It is estimated that 2 million people died during the partition of India and that 14 million lost their homes. The most famous casualty of the partition was that of Gandhi himself, who was killed by a Hindu nationalist all because he wanted to make peace with the Muslims. However, this would only be the beginning of hostilities. There was one region that was left untouched, and that was the region of Kashmir, or Jammu Kashmir if you want to get technical. For those who don't know, Kashmir is a region in North India that's technically its own nation and technically not. It's very complicated. At the time, Kashmir was ruled by the Maharaja Hari Singh. Now the Maharaja was actually a pretty cool leader. He made tons of reforms such as helping the poor, banning the caste system, advancing women's rights, and promoting religious tolerance. However, there was one problem. Singh was a Hindu while the majority of the people in Kashmir were Muslims. Pakistan, being the majority Muslim country, wanted Kashmir to unite with it. However, while the Maharaja had sympathies towards India, he preferred to stay independent, as did most of the populace who also wanted to stay independent or join India. The Pakistanis, not taking this too lightly, decided to take Kashmir by force. On October 22, 1947, Pakistan would send Islamic rebel fighters to overthrow the government of Kashmir. At first, the Kashmirian army would beat back the rebels, however more kept coming. Desperate, the Maharaja went to India for help. The Indians agreed, but on one condition. If India helped Kashmir, Kashmir would join India as a semi-autonomous state, which the Maharaja agreed to, and India sent troops to fight the Muslim rebels. Pakistan, seeing this as a threat, decided to invade Kashmir. It is here where Indian and Pakistani troops will fight against each other for the first time. The Pakistanis at first managed to push back the Indians, however by late 1948, the Indians began to gain the upper hand. Using ethnic Indian Nepalese troops called Gurkhas who were familiar with the mountain terrain and known for their fierce combat skills, the Indians also had better equipment and thus were able to beat back the Pakistanis. Also, during the final months of the war, Pakistan's leader Muhammad Ali Jinnah died from tuberculosis, so morale among the Pakistani troops were low. It seemed like victory was in sight for the Indians. Then all of a sudden, Indian Prime Minister Nehru would go to the United Nations in order to sue for peace. The UN drew a ceasefire on January 5, 1949. The war was over. Pakistan gained 1/3 of Kashmir while India got the other 2/3. China also owns a piece, but that's a different story there. Unfortunately, civilians were caught in the crossfire as many were killed and many women were raped and kidnapped by the invading forces. However, this will be the first of many fights to come. Despite growing into an economic powerhouse, around the 1960s, India wasn't looking too good. In 1962, it suffered a humiliating defeat against China during the Sino-Indian War. And in 1964, it was dealing with the death of its first Prime Minister Nehru and was adjusting to his successor Lal Bahadur Shastri, who many Indians had mixed views on. Because of this, the Pakistani military thought it was the best time to strike. Pakistan's president Ayub Khan was hesitant at first, but the generals in his cabinet pressured him to start another war with India. On August 5, 1965, 30,000 Pakistani troops would disguise themselves as Kashmir locals and invaded the region. Tipped off by the actual locals, the Indian army would go into Kashmir and take on the Pakistanis. On September 1, 1965, Pakistan would launch a counterattack against the Indians. The Pakistanis were better equipped, using weapons and vehicles supplied to them by the Americans and Chinese, while the Indians used equipment supplied to them by the Russians, British, and French. While formidable, India had to work its way through the technical gap. The Indians were calling their air force to help, but Pakistan responded by sending in theirs. Bombing runs and major dogfights would occur between the two air forces. However, despite the Indians losing more planes and the Pakistanis having the superior tech, not one side could achieve air superiority. On the ground, it was a different story. On September 6, 1965, Indian forces would invade Pakistan. It is here that the largest tank battle since the Second World War would be fought. While Pakistan had the better tanks, the Indians managed to win almost every one of the major tank battles. However, the same cannot be said about the Kashmirian front. The fighting would lead to a stalemate. Both sides could not make any efforts to advance until finally the international community got involved. The Soviet Union would sponsor peace talks between the two countries. At the negotiating table, both sides were stubborn until finally the two would come to an agreement. On September 23, 1965, the war ended. On January 10, 1966, a peace treaty was signed between India and Pakistan. The war was very stressful for both sides and affected them badly. How so? Well, literally the day after signing the treaty, Prime Minister Shastri would die from a heart attack. As for President Khan, the war was one of the factors that led to him resigning in 1969. Despite both sides claiming victory, for many the war was seen as pointless as no one got anything from it. However, this new treaty between India and Pakistan will be one to last for a lifetime. It lasted 5 years. For most of this video, we've been mainly focusing on the Kashmir region, but for this one, we go eastward. This is East Pakistan. For some of you may know it as the modern-day Bangladesh. As mentioned before, when the British partitioned India, they made two Pakistans, one in the west and one in the east. West Pakistan was where the main government was located along with a large amount of space. However, East Pakistan was where most of the population was at. The Pakistans were separated from each other by 930 miles or 1500 kilometers. Aside from being majority Muslim regions, they were very differently geographically, ethnically, linguistically, and even religiously. For starters, West Pakistan's terrain was more mountainous and filled with deserts, while the east was more tropical and had more jungles. The West Pakistanis were mostly made of Punjabis but had other ethnic groups such as Pashtuns and Sindhis who mainly spoke Urdu, while the east were overwhelmingly Bengali who spoke the Bangla language. The East Pakistanis wanted a more secular government while the West wanted to run things with traditional Muslim values, though in recent years the former has reversed this position, but I digress. So already there was a major divide between the two people. It didn't help that the West Pakistanis treated the East Pakistanis as second-class citizens, and more money was spent on the economy of the West than the East. West Pakistan would make attempts to subdue the Bengali language and culture and make Urdu the major language of East Pakistan. However, these tensions would soon flare up. In 1970, an East Pakistani politician named Sheikh Mujibur Rahman won a landslide victory to become Prime Minister of Pakistan. However, the main government ignored these results. This angered many people in the East and protests began to spread up across the country. It didn't help that West Pakistan did nothing when a terrible cyclone hit the East. The Eastern Pakistanis, having enough, demanded independence from the West. To put down the protesters, West Pakistan sent troops to occupy the region, with Rahman later being arrested. Pakistan justified this move in order to protect the Urdu-speaking minority. Unfortunately, the Pakistani army ran amok as they would conduct a genocide on the Bengalis. From town to town, thousands of people will be massacred. Both Bengali Muslims and Hindus will feel the wrath of the Pakistani army and their collaborators. It is estimated that 300,000 to 3 million people died during this time. As you can imagine, the native Bengalis did not take this too kindly and started to rise up against the Pakistanis. Thus, in March 1971, the Bangladesh Liberation War began. Because of the war, millions upon millions of refugees would flee to India, even though Pakistani President Yahya Khan, no relation to Ayub Khan, denied these claims. India, having to deal with these refugees, knew they would have to face Pakistan in the future. However, the Indians couldn't do anything about it due to the pressure from the international community, as most countries supported Pakistan. For the next 9 months, the rebels would fight against the Pakistanis alone. However, the Pakistanis were able to put down most of the rebellion. Victory was in sight for Pakistan until they made one really stupid mistake. They brought India into the war. On December 3rd, 1971, the Pakistani Air Force launched a surprise airstrike on an Indian air base and other key Indian positions as well. However, they failed in their mission so badly to the point that they did not destroy any targets. In fact, they almost hit the Taj Mahal. It was like Pearl Harbor, but if the Japanese were incompetent. Still, this angered India's Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, who had no relations to Mahatma, but she was the daughter of first Prime Minister Nehru. And she did not follow the path of non-violence. See, Gandhi was called the Iron Lady of India, meaning this was a woman you didn't want to screw with. The next day, the Indian Air Force would launch a counterstrike against the Pakistanis. They would constantly bomb Pakistani air bases until their air force was completely obliterated. The Indians learned from their mistakes from previous wars, and their objective was to take out the Pakistani forces as quickly as possible. Later, the Indian army invaded Pakistan when they fought against the best trained soldiers in the Pakistani army. However, the Indians would conduct an operation that would take out most of Pakistan's forces, with many Pakistani soldiers fleeing, thus giving India an easy victory in the west. The Indian Navy would also destroy the Pakistani Navy, which was stationed in the port city of Karachi. On the Eastern Front, it was a different story. Pakistan would put more of a fight, thus keeping the Indian and Bengali rebels at bay. So India decided to use blitzkrieg-style tactics in order to kick out the Pakistanis. Not to mention, the Indians blockaded the Bay of Bengal, thus cutting off all supplies for the Pakistanis. Also, in a way, this was sort of a proxy war. India was supported by the Soviet Union and Pakistan was supported by the United States. In fact, both countries almost got involved. On December 11, 1971, the United States would send the aircraft carrier the USS Enterprise to the Bay of Bengal as a show of force and support for the Pakistanis. But there was also a Russian submarine in the waters as well. The Americans, not wanting to escalate the conflict, decided to pull back. On December 16, 1971, the war ended. It took India 2 weeks to defeat the Pakistanis. Later that day, East Pakistan would become the People's Republic of Bangladesh, with Sheikh Mujibur Rahman becoming its first prime minister, thus taking away 65% of the population of Pakistan. For Pakistan, this was a humiliating defeat. It was so bad that President Khan had to resign in shame. For India, this was a great victory as it made up for all those wars that ended in defeat or stalemate and boosted the popularity of Indira Gandhi, who remained in power until her death in 1984. The war helped secure India's presence as a global power and showed that India wasn't playing around, and it'll be a while before the two countries would butt heads again. During the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, the two nations developed their own successful nuclear weapons programs. This led to a lot of fears as something would set these two off with tensions still high. One event almost caused a war in 1987. The Indian army was conducting drills near the Pakistani border, however Pakistan thought they were preparing for an attack. But the situation with these escalated after a friendly game of cricket.
Cricket? Nobody understands cricket. You gotta know what a crumpet is to understand cricket.
However, back in Kashmir, things weren't looking so good. Starting in 1989, there has been a separatist movement where Islamic rebel groups have been fighting against India. Some of these rebels, like in previous conflicts, were supported by Pakistan. This uneasy peace would last for about 10 years and then the two nations would go at it again. In 1998, India's new Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee wanted peace with Pakistan, stating that India and Pakistan should work together instead of fighting. Unfortunately, there was a large minority of Pakistanis who did not want peace. In late 1998, early 1999, 4 Pakistani generals would secretly send troops into a district of Kashmir known as Kargil. Ironically, all while this was happening, India and Pakistan would sign a treaty in order to de-escalate the situation in Kashmir. The Pakistanis were spotted by a local shepherd, so a small squad of Indian soldiers were sent to investigate. However, the soldiers were ambushed and captured by the Pakistanis. The surviving Indian soldiers would be tortured and later killed. India responded by mobilizing 30,000 troops to take on the Pakistanis. However, there was a problem. Kargil is an extremely mountainous region. The terrain was similar to that of Pakistan, in which the Pakistanis felt right at home. Many of the Indian soldiers, on the other hand, were from tropical and warmer climates, so it took a lot of getting used to. On May 26, 1999, India would launch airstrikes on Pakistani positions. However, they were limited in their approach as they were not allowed to cross the border, which was Pakistani airspace. Despite this, India was still able to gain air superiority. On the ground, the Indian troops were having trouble. The Pakistanis were dug in too deep, so much so that artillery barrages barely did anything. So in order to smoke out the Pakistanis, the Indians had to climb the mountains. As previously stated, the Indian forces were from flatter and tropical areas while the Pakistanis were raised in the mountains. Despite that, the Indians came through, but at a high cost. The next couple of months, the Indian army would slowly retake Kargil. During the final weeks, India would launch a counterattack on the Pakistanis. Pakistan begged its allies, the United States and China, for help using the threat of nuclear war as a deterrent, but both declined. In fact, the whole international community was against Pakistan, which was a far cry from the 1971 war, with American President Bill Clinton demanding that Pakistan pull out of Kargil, just like how he pulled out of Monica. I'm sorry, but when am I ever going to get another opportunity to make that joke? Finally, on July 26, 1999, India took back Kargil, though the victory was bittersweet. On one hand, India won, but this war was televised and Indians saw firsthand what the war cost. In Pakistan, the populace was very unhappy. The Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif was ousted by a coup and Pakistan would become a military dictatorship until 2013, where Sharif would return and those that perpetrated the coup would be executed. But sadly, this isn't the end. So what's in store for the future of these two nations? Well, the two countries have had close calls in 2001 and 2008. However, starting in 2016, there have been some border skirmishes between the two countries that left many dead. In early 2019, Pakistan shot down 2 Indian jets and the pilots were captured. Luckily, they were both returned unharmed. On August 3rd, 2019, India has commenced martial law on Kashmir, revoking its status as a semi-autonomous state. The region has been on lockdown, no communication, no internet allowed. We do get a glimpse of the situation here and there, and it does not look pretty. Some Indians are celebrating this, while many Pakistanis are fearful. So you may be asking, why now? Well, enter India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Modi is a part of the right-wing Indian People's Party, or BJP. The thing about him is that Modi is a Hindu nationalist. Through his campaigns, Modi has promised a stronger India and has a tough on Pakistan policy. Modi has also implemented anti-Muslim policies in India, with one of the most recent ones making it hard for Muslim immigrants to become citizens. This was one of the causes for the horrible Delhi riots that occurred in February 2020. Under Modi, military spending has gone up for India to the point that it replaced the United States as the second largest army in the world, and if current population trends continue, it will soon replace China as the world's largest army. Because of this show of strength, he is very popular in India. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan, who has no relations to the previous Khans, though he was part of Pakistan's cricket team that went against India during the aforementioned 1987 match, has strongly criticized Modi and compared India's actions to Kashmir to the Nazis. And with the situation in Kashmir still going on, no one knows where the situation will go. But one can only hope cooler heads prevail and that it will not lead to another conflict.